to everybody. I want to welcome you this evening to our webinar, which is brought to you by the advisory services in the Roscommon Longford region. My name is Seán Doorley, and I'll be your host for this webinar. I'm a dry stock advisor, and I'm based in the Teagasc office in Longford. The title of this evening's webinar is Planting and Managing New Forests. The format for this evening is we have two speakers who will be presenting for approximately 20 minutes each. And at the end, we have time for approximately 20 minutes again for questions at the end. If you look at the bottom of your screens, you'll be able to see the Q&A tab where you can type your questions. The questions will be all answered live. We won't be answering or typing any answers to questions. So if you're viewing us on a mobile, just make sure you have your mobile phone charged for the next hour or so. The webinar will be recorded and you'll have an opportunity to watch it back again. We will be posting it on our YouTube channel, and there'll be links posted on our social media channels, our Facebook and Twitter pages. So this evening, we're going to be joined by two speakers. The two speakers this evening are Liam Kelly, who is a forestry advisor based in the Mullingar office, but covering Longford, Westmeath, Kildare, Laois and Offaly. Liam will be covering the area of and looking at the steps involved in the establishment of a new forest. Our second speaker is Noel Kennedy. Noel is based in the Roscommon office, and he also is a forestry advisor for the Galway and Mayo regions as well. And Noel's presentation, he will be looking at the management of our new forests. We also have Donal McCabe. Donal will be covering the Q&A session at the end. Just before we get started, I'll just mention a couple of items that's kind of relevant and timely for this time of the year. Any farmer that was in the GLAS, the BDGP, and also the Organic Farming Scheme have been given an opportunity to roll over these schemes for another year this year. And now the deadline for GLAS has passed. Farmers would have got a text, would have got a letter, and would have got an opportunity to roll over online. The closing date was last Friday, but if you have missed that deadline, there's still an opportunity there to contact the last section in Wexford and email them and submit an application through that method. But I wouldn't leave it too long. If you've already missed that deadline, contact them immediately. As regards the Organic Farming Scheme, farmers were written to, and also if you wish to roll over, you can do that by emailing the organic section in the Department of Agriculture. And there is no opportunity to roll over that organics online. It has to be via email. So refer to the letter that you would have got in the post as regards organics. As regards the BDGP, the deadline is the 17th, which is this coming Friday. The opportunity has passed to roll that over via the text system. So you must go online either on your own ag-food system or contact your advisor and let them roll over the BDGP for you. So that's just a couple of deadlines that's there. I'll just also mention a few safety. So it's at these webinars, I'd like to also mention a few safety issues that might exist on farms at this time of the year. So stock are housed, and it is the time of the year when farmers do be maybe given their treatments to animals for fluke and worms and lice, and it's when you're using your handling facilities at most. And opportunity to check your handling facilities, make sure they're working properly and properly functioning. Also, you know, where head gates are, where you have a head gate or you have a scoop, make sure you're using them and don't be taking chances, you know, trying to catch stock yourself, and never enter a crush when treating stock. So it's also important that there's no trip hazards around the crush area when you're operating. And it's also a good opportunity now to check your cabin facilities. Make sure your cabin gates are fully operating and that they're hanging properly, and you have plenty of lighting in those areas. So opportunity to check those in advance of the cabin season. So without further delay, I'm going to ask Liam, who's going to be our first speaker this evening, to just prepare his presentation there, and I'll ask Noel and Donal just to switch off your cameras. So,
okay, Seán.
Yeah, it's looking good there, Liam. Yeah,
okay,
great, Liam. So you have 20 minutes. Okay.
Okay, Seán. Thanks very much for giving us this opportunity to speak tonight. As you mentioned earlier on, we're going to speak about planting and managing a new forest, and I'm Liam Kelly, and I'll take on the first section of it, and then Noel will follow later on. I suppose just to mention that, as I said, my name is Liam Kelly. I'm based in the Midlands. I cover 5 of the Midland counties, as you just said, Seán, and Noel is in the west. There's 8 advisors throughout the country as forestry advisors, and we're the head of department is based in Athenry. Just I suppose there's 22 staff that works in the Teagasc Forestry Development Department, 4 head researchers, and they have some support staff as well. And then, as I mentioned, there's 8 advisors who offer advice on different aspects of forestry, and we're also supported then by our forestry specialists, and we also have a new liaison officer as well. Ballyhaise College then offers forestry courses. These are at level 5 and level 6, and they can be a 1 or a 2-year course. So just getting into the planting then, I suppose, just go back a little bit in history. About 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, we had about 80% of the country was covered in forestry. And as man came along and settled in the country, the area of forestry started to be reduced. And by the turn of the century, we were down to 1% forest cover. Now, this has again gone up to 11% at this stage. And this originally was brought about by the state buying up land, which is the green area on the graph. And over the years, our percentage area of forestry recovered quite well. But from the 80s onwards, then, which is the red part of the graph, landowners were encouraged to retain ownership of the land themselves and to plant that. And that was brought about by various incentives that came in over the years, namely the grant and premium stage schemes that are in place today. And so much so that all of the new planting today is being carried out by private landowners, such as yourselves are here on the webinar here tonight. I suppose in the 90s, there was quite a substantial area of planting because there was maybe a lot more spare available land to plant at that stage. And at this stage, there's still quite an area of land being planted each year. As you can see from this map, there's quite a bit of forestry all scattered throughout the country. And at this stage, we're up to 11% forest cover. What we would like to achieve is probably 18% forest cover. When I was in college, towards the end of the late 80s, early 90s, there was 7.5% forest cover. So today now we're up to 11%. So you can see over the last 30 years or so, about 3.5% of new forestry were put in place. The area of private forestry accounts for about 49% of the overall total of forest area at this stage, about 389,000 hectares. And 280,000 of that 280,000 hectares have been granted since the early 1980s. There's been 23,000 private landowners with forestry at this stage, and 83% or so of those are farmers. Forestry is worth about 2.3 billion to the exchequer every year. So it is very important that as the amount of land goes in, that as that comes to fruition, it adds a lot of value to the state between timber production and the jobs that it creates. So it is important. It's very important to the exchequer. Like 2.3 billion is quite a substantial amount. We have about 12,000 jobs in forestry. These are direct or indirect. Most of them are rural based, so they're very important to the rural economy. And also, most of our and all our plantations are well planted and well managed, and therefore they offer great ecosystem services potential going forward. Again, the timber supply, the main supply in Ireland would be from the state company, namely Quilcha. There's about they produce about 2.6 million tons of timber per year, and Northern Ireland about 500,000. So together they produce about 3 million tons per year. The biggest growth area will be in the private sector, and at the moment we're producing just short of 2 million cubic tons per annum, and it's reckoned that in about 3 to 4 years' time, the amount of timber coming from the private estate will actually surpass what's being produced by the state. And the biggest growth potential, which is the green area of this graph here, the biggest growth potential is the private sector. So, and it is important that our plantations are managed and that timber does come through from those woodlands, so to keep the timber industry going and improving and increasing. So, before you start, I suppose what I find with when lots of people plant for different reasons, and it's usually a number of reasons, not just one reason. So it is important that you know why you're planting, what is your objective. And as I said, most people will have a number of different objectives. So, you know, it could be maybe you're part-time farmer, maybe a reduced amount of labour unit required in the farm. It could be a non-farm pension fund. You could be thinking of retiring and therefore reducing the amount of work that's required on the farm. It could be just attractive grants that are available. Or also maybe it could be something to do with carbon storage or maybe the environment. So there's lots of various different reasons why some landowners will consider planting. The current scheme that's available is the Forestation Scheme 2014 to 2020. This has been extended up to 2023. And I suppose the three main aspects of it are is the establishing grant, which is paid generally after the trees have been planted. The outstanding quartered in, which is the maintenance grant, is paid generally 4 years later, or it could be 5 or 6 years, but generally 4 years later, depending on how well the plantation has established. And then there's an annual premium each year that's available generally for the first 15 years, which supports the grant scheme itself. So to qualify, you must be over 18 years of age. You must hold a PPSN number. You must be the owner or the leaseholder or joint manager of the land at the time of application. The land must also remain under forest cover. Once it's planted, it is subject to a replanting obligation. So it does have to remain under forestry. If you're considering planting, you do have to get technical approval first, and I'll go through that in a few minutes, but you have to get approval from the department to be able to plant your land. And once you get technical approval, then you also have to look for financial approval, which has to be in place before you actually commence to work on site. So that is important, that you do have approval got before you do any work. So the grants itself, there's 12 different GPC classes. You have some conifer ones, and then you have some broadleaf ones, and native woodland and agroforestry and forestry fibre scheme. So there's different GPC classes. These are grant premium categories, GPCs. And the grant itself is, as I said before, there's 3/4 of the grant roughly is paid in year 1 post-planting, and 4 years later, then you get the outstanding grant, which is the second grant or the maintenance grant. In addition to the grant, the initial establishing grant, then there's an allocation towards fencing. And this, in certain sites, you may not require any fencing at all, but when the application is prepared, you do have to put in a fencing map with it, with the application, to show where the fencing is required. And so if there's no fencing required, then the fencing element of the grant won't be paid. There's 2 categories on this. There's the non-IS standard, and that's at a reduced rate. And if you go for the higher standard stake, which is IS 436, then the maximum grant per hectare in relation to fencing is €600 per hectare. So you can see the 3/4 of the grant is paid in year 1, the other quarter is paid 4 years later. There's a fencing allocation then as well if required, and then you can see that the total level is over here. The grant level generally for broadleaves is more substantial than it is for conifers because you plant a higher density of trees, and generally they cost more to buy and establish as well. So that's why there is a higher rate of grant for the broadleaves than there is for conifers. It has generally been well worked out over the years. So, you know, the grant is generally there to help cover the cost of establishing a woodland. So what does the grant cover? Generally goes towards the planning stage. So you and your forester may prepare the site and prepare plans for the site. Ground preparation, that could be some kind of cultivation, be it mounding or it could be ripping. And then fencing. The fencing has to reflect the stock pressure. If you have sheep or if your neighbours have sheep, it's probably important to have sheep plus barbed wire. The minimum requirement is 3 strands of barbed wire for stock fencing. It can be supplemented by electric fence, but it has to be a permanent fence. Then also the supply of plants and planting. You may also have to put in a fire break in certain sites. So that's what, and generally these 5 elements is the first part of the grant that goes towards establishing the site. And after 4 years later, when the crop may be established and the trees are growing freely and the trees are generally healthy looking, the maintenance grant may be paid at that stage. Most times the grant will cover the costs unless it's a very small site or it's very fragmented. Most times landowners will get a forester. You have to get a forester to prepare a plan to apply for the grant. Sometimes the forest company may take on the work and they may do the work for the grant. So that may be an contract that you prepare together. But as I said, most of the time the grant is paid, because the grant is paid initially, and 4 years later, then the maintenance grant will be paid out if the crop has been fully established. Sorry, just about the screen here again. These are the 12 grant premium categories, and I suppose one of the bigger areas that people plant under is GPC tree, which is generally Sitka spruce plus 15% broadleaf. So that's the biggest category I would say that most people plant under. In the Midlands, we plant a lot under GPC4, which is a diverse conifer. Generally, it's Norway spruce, as opposed to Sitka. It's a slower grower, but generally it's more tolerant of frost, which you may sometimes get in the Midlands. In more recent times, then people are looking at native woodland, and there's two categories here: GPC 9 and GPC 10. So a lot are looking at the native woodland establishment, where you're planting native broadleaf trees mainly, and the ground conditions or the site conditions will determine whether you're in GPC 9 or GPC 10. The annual premium then is normally paid for 15 years. Okay, so this is the annual payment that you get for 15 years. And for GPC tree, for example, the premium per year is €510 per hectare. If you go for native woodland, it's €665 per hectare. So those are the premiums that are generally paid for 15 years. If you plant greater than 10 hectares, then you get an extra €15 per hectare. The only anomaly, I suppose, is the Agro-Authority Scheme. Currently, the premium is €645 a hectare, but the premium is paid for 5 years. For all others, the premium is paid for 15 years. At this stage, with the current scheme, there's no differentiation between farmer and non-farmer. Once you apply for the scheme and the site is approved, all receive the same premium rate. There's no distinction between farmer and non-farmer under this current scheme. So just to show you some pictures, this is a young conifer plantation, mainly Sitka spruce. There would be some additional broadleaves put in around the edges and in certain locations and groups, but they would have been up to 85% conifer, namely Sitka spruce in this plantation. Then another example would be native woodland, where you're planting native woodland species, mainly maybe oak, complemented with species such as alder or birch, maybe hazel or some holly. So there's different species put in under as well. And more modernly then, I suppose, we see the Agro-Authority Scheme. And this is where trees are planted at wider spacings. Each tree is individually protected. and you can carry out some grazing with sheep initially, or in between the lines you may even mow grass for silage or hay. So it's the only scheme where animals and the trees are allowed close together. In all the other schemes, or all the other categories, the livestock are fenced out. But under this scheme, each tree is planted individually. Tree guard is put around each one with 2 supporting stakes, and then either sheep or you can mow the grass in between. Okay, this is a site that was recently planted in the west. So you can see the stocking here. The trees are planted at more 5 meters apart. It's about 400 stems per hectare. In the ordinary conifer scheme, you'd be planting 2,500 stems per hectare. And with broadleaves, it's 3,300 stems per hectare. But with this scheme, the Agro-Forestry scheme, it's 400 to 1,000 stems per hectare. Normally, most will plant 400 at 5 meter spacings. But each tree has to be individually protected. The main players then in forestry, I suppose, are the department. They look after all the grants and premiums, and the local inspectorate then will look at each site and inspect each site to make sure that they're up to standard. They're based in Johnstown Castle with a number of inspectors based around the country. Teagasc ourselves then offers the support and advice and training opportunities and offer events like here tonight. I suppose the main part then in any application that's prepared, there's a list of approved foresters or registered foresters. All applications that go in for forestry schemes have to be prepared by a forester from this list. There's about over 200 foresters on the list. And to be on the list, you have to be a qualified forester, and you all have a certain level of indemnity insurance to be on the list. So all applications for grant aid has to be prepared from a forester from that list. And that list is available from Teagasc through the local forestry advisor or on our website, or also from the department as well. There's also a number of associations then that provide support then, such as the IFA and Irish Timber Growers, and again, the local forest owner groups as well. How forestry ties in then with other schemes, with the basic scheme, the basic payment scheme. If to be eligible, the land had to be declared in someone's 2008 single farm payment. And if it was paid on, that land will be eligible. And what that means is that if you plant land going forward, that land then can also draw down the forest premium, but also draw down this basic payment as well. So to be eligible, it had to be declared in someone's 2008 single farm application. So in that way, you can draw both the annual forest premium and you can also draw the basic payment on the land that you plant. It can also interact with other schemes, such as the national constraint. The maximum payment area under these schemes is between 30 hectares or 34 hectares. If you plant and you have a 30-hectare farm, and let's say you go below the threshold, then there's that results in a pro rata reduction in your ANC payment. But let's say you had 40 hectares, you could plant 10 hectares in that case, and because you still have 30 hectares for the national, you can still maximize your ANC payment. So, you know, but you won't get the ANC payment and the forestry on the same piece of land. In gloss, if their parcels are in gloss, they must be taken out in order so that you can plant those that area. You may be in the gloss scheme, but not all your farm may be on the gloss in the gloss scheme. So the areas that are not in the gloss scheme, they can be planted without any clawback. But any parcels that are actually noted in your gloss plan, you cannot plant those without taking them out of the scheme, and there will be a clawback on in the gloss for the area that you took out. It's the same for the organic scheme. The organic scheme is a 5-year scheme. So if the area is, if you're in an organic scheme, you're tied up in that scheme generally for the 5 years. So if you plant while you're in the organic scheme, there will be a clawback on the area that you plant. So you're the landowner, you're considering forestry. You have to engage a registered forester to look at the land and prepare a plan for you. That's then prepared and submitted to the Forest Service. The Forest Service then will adjudicate on it and check it out that it is suitable for planting and that it won't have any negative effect on the local environs. And if they're happy with the application, then approval will be issued. Now, this process can take a certain length of time, so it is important if you are considering planting that you do apply in time. You should be probably giving yourself up to a year to get approval, maybe even higher in sensitive areas. And again, Teagasc are there to support and give advice on all steps as you go through. There is a forestry license viewer. Any application that goes into the Forest Service are listed on the department website. These then are placed on the license viewer. So if you click on any of these red polygons, these are an actual application, a forestry application that has gone in those locations. So I've just taken a snapshot of it here, of this part of the country. So all these red spots or polygons are actually individual applications that have gone in the last, I think about the last 2 years or so. So by clicking on either one, when it's, if you go in live on the website, you'll be able to follow or track your application. So you can also see your other applications that have gone in the region as well. And when you're looking at it, they will say if you click on your individual polygon, it will actually say the status of the application, what forms have been submitted, and whether the site has pending approval or has been approved, or in certain cases maybe have even been planted. So it will it'll give you a status report on where the application is. So just be careful, anyone that's putting in an application, there's a lot of detail listed up there and that can be seen. So just be wary of it. The other thing I would say, sorry, I should have said, is when an application is being prepared for a site notice does have to go up. That does have to be put up before the application is forwarded to the Forest Service. So just that you are aware that site notice does go up nowadays, and that has to be prepared before and erected before the application is made to the Forest Service.
Yeah, soon now. Yeah.
Okay. There's many benefits that people will consider. I'll just move on through. I suppose carbon. A lot of people are talking about carbon nowadays, and there's different pools of carbon. It can be above the ground and below the ground, and different aspects. So what we do know is that trees take in carbon dioxide. They release oxygen, and there's carbon is stored in the trees. The longer that they can be stored there, the better that the more sequestration is taking place. We have prepared a carbon forest tool. It's available. It's up on our website. It's an indicative carbon tool, which gives an indication of the amount of carbon that's being sequestered over 2 rotations. It's only an indicative tool. It's there for anyone to look at if anyone is interested. I'll just move on to one other because we're down it. Okay, just I suppose not all soils are suitable. There's a number of different soils that are very suitable to forestry, and it's important that the trees match the area, that your forester will take that on board, what kind of ground it is, what kind of soil it is. But there is some areas then that are not suitable, and such as high bog or lean heather, sites with outcrop, or in the Midlands here, low-lying areas maybe with shell marl, and then other areas that are prone to flooding. So it is important that you're aware of what sites are suitable and what sites are not. There is minimum area then for conifers is 1 hectare. For conifers is 1 hectare, and for broadleaves is 0.1 of a hectare. And for an agroforestry plot, it's 0.5 of a hectare. So I'm just going to leave you with this. It's a case study where this landowner was considered, he had 24 hectares, which is 60 acres. He was considering planting. He wanted to plant some commercial area, and he also wanted to leave a small legacy forestry. So this is the area here. There's lots of contours on it, and you can see the slopes. This is the soil type. this is a wetter area, wet mineral, poorly drained area. Whereas up here in the more higher area, there was acid mineral, but better drained soil. And down near the river, the water body here, there's an alluvial area. So, so this is the SAC, the water body and the floodplain adjoining it, and there was an old remnant woodland. There was a ring fort, not really on the site, so it doesn't really have an effect on the site, but off in the distance. Then this drain or stream runs beside the site, but it connects to the water body, and this would be very important when it comes to actually preparing an application, that's taken on board. So what they decided to plant with his forester was on this wetter marginal area that would plant GPC tree, Sitka spruce plus 15% broadleaves. And then on this area up here, they went for native woodland, GPC 9. So in total, there was 5.8 hectares of conifers, 3.5 hectares of native woodland. And then the ABE down here as well also qualified under the 15% rule. So in total, there was about 10.8 hectares planted, given a return of €7,436 per hectare through the premium. And this would be in addition to the farming practice that would still remain carried out on the rest of the farm. And also this area was also allowed him, he was allowed collected basic payment in this area as well, because it was considered eligible ground. So it just shows where forestry may supplement a farm income. And each area or each farm would have to be taken on its own merits. With that, I'll leave you. Thank you. And I'll hand you over to Noel.
Okay. Thank you, Liam, for your presentation. You can just stop sharing it there now. So great. Thanks very much, Liam, for that excellent presentation. Plenty of information and there regards planting in that presentation. So just want to remind you to keep your questions coming in. We have some questions coming in there. So just the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. So keep your questions coming in, and we'll keep all the questions to the end of the presentations. So Noel, I'll ask you to share your screen there.
Oops.
Yeah, that looks good.
Yeah, apologies for that. Good evening. And thanks, thank you very much, Seán and Liam. Noel Kennedy, Forestry Advisor based in Roscommon. So I'll take you through the early years of your new forest, and really these first few years in the life of the forest are absolutely crucial in getting your getting the best results from your forest and hopefully achieving the many objectives that you might have set out when you were considering planting, as Liam mentioned earlier. So it's the first 4 years really that I'll concentrate on, but I will look briefly at the following years, some of the years following that. So the first 4 years, and I suppose this is really good advice that we would like forest owners to adhere, and that really is to be familiar with your forest, walk your forest, know what species is planted where, why it's planted there, and also keep in contact with your forester. So your new forest, it may be a conifer forest like this, a GPC tree, for every hectare, 70% conifer, 15% broadleaf, and 15% areas for biodiversity. Or it could be a broadleaf plantation, such as this oak plot. It could be under the native woodland scheme, or it could be under one of the commercial broadleaf plots. But no matter which type of forest you have, establishing those trees in the first 4 years and getting it over the line for the second installment of the grant is extremely important. And Liam mentioned there the role of the registered forester in terms of the initial application process, but the forester has a very important role in many cases in maintaining those trees for the first 4 years. So the maintenance contract in most cases is part of that I suppose, planting contract, and that is to look after the trees for the first 4 years, and to achieve success at the second installment, are what we call the maintenance grant stage. And in most cases, in return for this second part of the grant, in other words, that the forester will plant and look after your trees for 4 years, 4 to 5 years, in return for the full grant. And really, from the start, it's really important that you have a good relationship with your forester, good sort of communication channels, and this is a two-way, two-way conversation. It's not just one way that you're chasing the forester, or that the forester is trying to talk to you, but you're not really communicating. It's very important that yourself and your forester really have a good relationship. And again, to repeat our mantra, walk the forest with your forester at least once, if not twice a year, and see what's going on and understand why different jobs are being done and what other jobs do need to be done. So there are different challenges to the young trees, but the number one challenge is vegetation management: grass, rush, briars, you name it. So we start off with our trees being planted into lovely, fresh, clean ground, but very quickly nature begins to reclaim what it feels it owns. And by the end of the first growing season, you could find your conifers and your broadleaves sort of beginning to come under pressure from grass and vegetation, and indeed in some cases going into winter with a very heavy sort of sward of grass or rush beginning to encroach, or indeed in some cases lie over on top of them. And the consequences of these are that the pressure from this vegetation could damage a tree over the winter. The worst case scenario is that it will kill the trees, and in some cases it will distort the trees if they do survive. And you can see there on the right where furze is taking over what was a cleared hill there, and again thorny type of vegetation rubbing against young trees and covering them. Very, very bad news for young trees. So early and effective vegetation management is essential. Liam mentioned there in the Midlands that there's a lot of Norway spruce planted. So this is a photograph of a young Norway spruce, only about a year old, where there has been very good effective weed control around it. And really what that effective weed control does is it allows you to grow your trees past that threat from vegetation, be it a conifer or be it a broadleaf. The main thing is to get those trees out and ahead of the grass and the rush and all the other vegetation, and then they will be able to work away on their own 2 feet. There are different ways of controlling vegetation. Chemical, traditionally, using herbicides would be the most common, but there has been quite a significant shift away from the use of chemicals like glyphosate, Roundup in our conifer plantations. And now there's a lot more use of manual grass cleaning. And indeed, the Native Woodland Scheme, which Liam mentioned, the application of herbicides is not permitted in native woodlands except in extenuating circumstances. There are very strict environmental guidelines to be followed if you are applying herbicides, and this is all part of, as you're probably familiar with, the Sustainable Use Directive, and which is part of the Water Framework Directive. So really the big threat from using pesticides and herbicides is to our water quality. How can you avoid, I suppose, the excesses of using herbicides? Well, then use an integrated pest management approach. And this is, it sounds very complicated, but essentially it's a very common sense approach. So for instance, with forestry, what are we talking about here? First of all, planting with the correct type of species, and maybe mixing your species so that not all the trees are at the same risk of, say, vegetation competition. Use and use and plant good trees, strong trees. Plant them at the right time of the year so that they get off to the best possible start. Don't use fertilizer unnecessarily. We use very, very little fertilizer in our forests, our new forests. So if the land doesn't need them and the trees don't need them, why use them? So avoid using fertilizers, and also retain the shelter. You know, don't start taking out hedgerows. Now this is not strictly allowed, but you know, don't take out other areas of scrub if they can be included as part of the biodiversity area, and they will provide important shelter for your young trees, and that will help those young trees to motor on and get away above the grass and minimize the use of herbicides. And really, as I said, it's all about protecting our water quality. This is the River Moy in Mayo. You can see the sloping ground there. This is the type of land or type of river and waterway that's really at high risk of runoff from things like fertilizer and herbicides. And this is all strictly controlled by the department guidelines, such as the Forestry Standards Manual, and these are constantly being tweaked by the department. The other issue then is to replace trees that might have died. There'll always be some natural mortality. It could be, however, due to vegetation competition. It could be due to frost damage. In some cases, it could be due to the trees being damaged by hares or rabbits. Or I suppose the worst case scenario is where there's deer, and deer are, I suppose, an increasing threat. What we're looking at here is maintaining tree stocking, and Liam mentioned there that you plant around 2,500 conifers per hectare, maybe 3,300 broadleaves per hectare. At year 4 stage or maintenance grant stage, you should be at 90% of the original number of trees, and ideally as close to 100% as possible, because that gives you a head start when it comes to selecting your trees for future thinning in the years to come. And that means that trees that die are badly damaged may need to be replaced, and that operation is called filling in, and it's also known as beating up in the nicest possible way. Frost has been an issue on forestry plantations, certainly in the west, for the past couple of years. We're talking here about late spring frosts, late May, early June, when the new growth is very vulnerable. Frost will cause dieback and can cause forking, but strong recovery in the trees is very common, particularly trees that are in the ground maybe 3 or 4 years. But it is something to just be aware of. We have been particularly unfortunate there over the past couple of years with late spring frost damage. So good vegetation control around the trees to keep down the grass and to encourage the movement of air and maybe prevent the frost really from settling, that's important, but filling in may be required on some sites. We have very few insect threats to our forests in Ireland, but one of them to our younger trees is what's called the green spruce aphid. So it only affects spruces. It is a type of greenfly. It would be related to our commoner garden greenfly that affects roses. So it's a sap sucker. You know, if we get a mild winter and spring, the population gets very large, and it can cause problems to the previous year's needles. That is a mistake there. So it's the previous year's needles that can drop as a result of the green spruce aphid. There's no practical control, but again, trees that are growing well will recover strongly, but their recovery may be slower if there's also previous frost damage. So for any forest owners who are looking in there, take a note of this. This is maybe your winter management checklist, and that is to replace any dead trees in your young forest, shape your oak if you have oak, either as pure plots or maybe some in the boundary. In some cases, if there's a discoloration in your conifers, you may need to take foliar samples to just check for nutrients. Just check how you're fixed for your fire insurance, and also don't forget to apply for your forestry premium. So formative shaping is a requirement for the pure broadleaf plots such as oak or beech, or sycamore, species like that. And you're removing forks and side branches to really encourage the tree to grow into a high quality timber tree in the years to come. So you can see here that there are immediate effects from shaping. The second photograph there's a clear fork. If you don't do anything about that, that fork stays exactly there and that tree grows into a low quality tree. So now is the time to remove that, single that into one single stem, and that tree, you can see the shape has been improved on that tree, and that tree will certainly reap the rewards of that. So by year 4, what are we looking at? Hopefully, we're looking at a forest that is healthy, vigorous, well stocked, and meets the requirements of the maintenance grant, be it a GPC3 or be it a native woodland. As we can see here, you can see oak, cherry, birch just in that photograph there. So what are we talking about for maintenance grant standard? For the forest to be established, which is worth 25% of the total grant, we're talking about healthy trees, growing clear of vegetation, satisfactory number of trees, and the first shaping completed in grant-aided broadleaf plots. So failure to achieve the second instalment, it doesn't risk your premium immediately, but within a couple of years, your premium may be stopped if you still haven't achieved your maintenance grant standard. And of course, that's where communication with your forester is so important. Moving on very quickly to years 4 to 11, and again, know your forest, walk your forest. Make sure that your fences remain intact. We don't want shergar here inside the fence, we want them outside. Just check for other damage, such as deer on the right-hand side and the potential for hare or rabbit damage. But by that stage, that really should be insignificant. But check your fences, particularly after, say, the storms, that a tree hasn't come down and broken the fence. In some and increasingly rarer cases now, because the land we're planting is much better than it used to be, I suppose, but you still may get patches on moory ground or maybe in the Midlands where you could encounter some nutrient deficiencies such as nitrogen or maybe potash. And it's important to try and identify and resolve those issues. Again, with your broadleaves, continue the good work that you did with your shaping and maybe extend that shaping into pruning and high pruning so that your trees are beginning to really look like a high quality, sort of young timber or young broadleaf woodland, which will produce quality timber in the years to come. Maintain your, I suppose, first of all, your awareness of the risk of fire, but particularly where there is a fire break in existence, adjoining bog, make sure that that fire break is maintained so that it can remain effective to prevent the spread of the fire. Beyond year 11, we're now beginning to look at the trees in the next few years becoming ready for timber production or thinning. So for plantations over 10 hectares, a management plan is required to bring it to year 20, and a number of forest owners have been getting those requests from the department. So we're talking here about planning for thinning, and one of the most important things is to provide access in through your forest. Also, look at where a forest road or an entrance may be important, and there will be grant aid available to help with a forest road construction. Access is provided by inspection paths, and these are two forest owners who have done exactly that. They have cut inspection paths through their semi-mature plantation, and you can see how easy it will be to walk through that and help both themselves, but help a forester to prepare measurements, etc. If you're doing any work in the forest, just be careful of your health and safety, wear the proper PPE, avoid working alone, and always let someone know where you are. And if you are working with somebody, obviously in the COVID era, unfortunately, follow all the appropriate health protocols. A very important reminder to apply for the 2022 Forestry Premium. This has to be applied online. If you apply before Christmas, you will get your first payment there by hopefully mid-January. You have to log on to your Ag-Food account with your username, password, and pack number. So very important maybe to, after we're finished here, go up to the office or out to the kitchen and see, can you find your username, password, and pack. If you have any difficulties with that, do ring the Ag-Food help desk at those numbers, 049 numbers. And if you have any other issues with the Forestry Premium, do ring the Department of Agriculture in Johnstown Castle on their Forest Premium. So the take-home message really, as the old saying goes, a good start is half the work, and that is so important for forestry. So the early management, good early management will pay dividends. Again, know your forest, walk your forest. Support and advice is there from you, from myself in Roscommon, Liam in Longford. And we have a load of other support information there, particularly our Teagasc website, which is a mine of information. So thank you very much. And on behalf of Liam and myself and all in the Forestry Development Department, happy Christmas.
Okay, thank you, Noel. And you can just stop sharing there. And I suppose I'll say we do give assistance. The local advisors to farmers when completing their Forestry Premium applications there on Ag-Food, and we have done that for a few farmers. Now, you know, in the recent years, it's moved online. There used to be a paper application for the Forestry Premium, but it's moved online, so we have give assistance. So if you have your Ag-Food details and all that ready, you can come into us and we'll give you a hand getting that application submitted. So, okay, thanks to Noel and Liam there for their two excellent presentations, and we have a good few questions. Donal has been busy there keeping an eye on the questions, so a good few questions coming in. So, yeah, look what we have till, I suppose, 9 o'clock there to get to those questions. So I'll hand it over to you, Donal.
Thanks, Seán, and well done, Liam, Noel, on two very informative presentations. Yeah, as Seán says, a good few questions coming in, so there's no real time to hang about. Just, I suppose, before I do get into them, though, it's a scenario that I came across, unfortunately, once or twice, in terms of where a farmer may have planted maybe some land 2 or 3 years ago, then decided to retire and to give the land, let's say, to a son or daughter, didn't want to bother applying for BPS themselves, was going to leave that to the son or daughter. Noel, would you have any advice in a situation like that?
Yeah, that's a really important point there, Donal. Where there is BPS eligible forestry and there is a change of ownership, it is extremely important that the new owner is also associated with the forestry premium. So, for instance, if a farmer holds on to his forest and the forestry premium, holds on to his forestry premium, but he transfers the forestry and his land, say, to his son, and the son has the herd number and applies for the BPS in the expectation that he will also get the basic payment on his forestry, there will be a problem there, because unless his name is attached to that forestry premium, that forest will be deemed ineligible. And it could, the situation could actually, I suppose, become more serious in terms of overclaims, etc. So the message is that if you are taking over a forestry plantation from somebody and it is BPS eligible, make sure that you also take over or are associated with the forestry premium.
Okay.
Yeah, Seán, Noel can add just on that, I suppose. Yeah. I see a few that are changing over recently, and if they were on the older premium, it's important that whoever is taking over the land also qualify for the premium. Okay, I've seen one or two where they've transferred it over. The son or daughter may not be farming, but they have to qualify as a farmer to in their own right to draw down the premium. So that was for people that had planted pre January 2015.
Okay, thanks. This is a sort of a question that's overlapping on both of you. Liam, I might direct it towards yourself. After 4 years, who determines if the forestry has established enough to be able to draw down the remaining 25% establishment grant? And I suppose, is it the foresters' main responsibility to to make sure the forest has established to a sufficient standard, or is it the landowners?
No, well, generally both have to sign off on a year 4 that the crop has been established. Okay, and sometimes not through anyone's fault. Sometimes the forest may be not quite ready at year 4. It could be 5 or year 6, and sometimes the owner or the forester may make the call that we won't put in the application for another year or 2 until the crop has been fully established. So generally the forest will be inspected at year 4 or year 5 once the application goes in. And if it's not up to standard, the grant may not be paid until it's brought up to standard.
It's the Department of Agriculture, I presume.
They have the inspector. But not all may go through be inspected, but the majority will be inspected. And if it's not up to standard at that stage, it may be held back for a year or 2 until it's brought up to standard. Okay. The 6 premium will be paid. After that, the premium will be stopped until the plantation is brought up to standard.
Okay, thanks, Liam. There's sort of a crystal ball type question here, but I'll just be interested in your thoughts on it. It's just a question that came in. Noel, I might direct this one towards yourself. In the future, do you think there may be an option to keep the carbon in the trees? So in other words, that farmers would be paid or landowners would be paid to leave the trees standing instead of cutting them down for timber?
Yeah, that incentive is it's already there, to be honest with you. We're talking here about avoiding, I suppose, what we normally term the clear felling system, which is more common with the conifers. So there is an alternative management, I suppose, approach which is becoming more popular. Now, it's not suited to all plantations, but we call it continuous cover forestry, where you thin your forest in such a way to encourage the selection of the younger, better trees to grow on. You're taking out some of the larger trees. You're thinning in such a way to create an environment for young trees, hopefully to naturally regenerate, or indeed you're introducing young trees under the original trees. You may also wish to change species. It depends very much on the site, but this results in I suppose, a continuum, you might call it, of forest growth, different tree ages, growing, ongoing harvesting, maybe smaller scale, but more regular harvesting. And in essence, there's no clear felling. There is a forest in place all the time. So the carbon sequestration is ongoing. But like all forests, trees will have to be cut once they're cut. And if that timber is converted into a wood product, that carbon will remain stored in the timber for as long as that timber is in existence.
Okay. Liam, once the premia after 15 years has been exhausted, is there any other financial supports available then? And also, is there any financial supports for replanting?
Okay, under the current scheme or the current program, the premium is paid for 15 years. Generally, at that stage, once the 15 years is up, if it's a conifer species, it probably will be approaching a thinning stage. Generally, with conifers, you normally will thin maybe every 3 to 5 years, and that will give a return. The broadleaves, the conifers some conifers. If you go for the clear fell, generally will mature maybe between 30 and 40 years of age, depending on the species. Broadleaves, again, you can start thinning once normally maybe when they get to about 15 years of age as well. It goes on height, but the long term of broadleaves takes longer to come to maturity. And the ultimate return, I suppose, is when the crop is cut down. So with broadleaves, you're probably talking a generation or two before they mature, whereas in the conifers they may mature in one generation. At the moment, there is no replanting. There is a replanting obligation, but there is no support for it. You do have to, replant out of your own cost, but generally it will be only a small percentage of what you can accrue at the time of clear fell.
And
Okay.
Donal, I beg your pardon, can I just add there in relation to the continuous cover forestry, that there is a scheme, a CCF scheme there available through the department at the moment for semi-mature plantations to begin that process of converting those to a continuous cover forestry system.
Okay. Noel, a management type question for yourself there. So when mounding for planting new trees, how deep do the drains have to be? So I suppose it's more for when you're establishing more than managing the new trees. But so in terms of preparing the site, when you're mounding the drains, how deep would they generally be?
Yeah, if this is for planting, say, the conifers, the mechanical mounding normally involves the digging of, say, drains maybe 10 or 12 meters apart. To be honest with you, it depends on the site and the quality of soil that you have. And a lot of it will depend on your machine man and how experienced that machine man is. And also the depth may also vary with the fall of the land in order to get water off the field. But typically what the ideal situation is that you go no deeper than the topsoil, and that you then take out your scoop of topsoil and then you drop that out on the ground beside the drain, and that obviously creates a sort of a double sandwich of topsoil. And you shouldn't really be going any deeper than about 5 inches or 5 or 6 inches really, but it depends on the soil, it depends on the drainage requirements of the field as well.
Okay. Liam, just there's a lot of talk about ash dieback disease in recent years. It's unfortunately devastating a lot of ash trees. Just could you explain? There's just a question in there, just asking just for information in terms of what it is. What is ash dieback disease?
Yeah, it's a pathogen that's attacking ash. It has been noted in Ireland since 2012. It was found in Europe about 20 years prior to that. Unfortunately, it's spreading quite rapidly through our crops, and also in our native hedgerows as well. It's slower growing going through more older mature trees, but it's spread by spores. The spores are in the air. It falls onto the leaf, and then depending on the spore load, if it's very high, it can pass from the leaf back into the twig and back into the branch and into the main stem. And when it gets back into the main stem, it generally just cuts off the growth of the tree, and the tree effectively dies. And we're finding that in some of the older trees, sometimes a secondary disease can come in, and sometimes that can be because the tree is weakened. It's causing quicker dieback of the tree, or that the tree is succumbing to the disease much quicker. And unfortunately, it's spreading. And in young plantations, I suppose, if the trees were already under stress, if it wasn't an ideal ash plantation, in certain cases, we've seen that the disease is moving much quicker through the crops.
Okay. Seán, there's just a couple of questions left. Am I okay to continue? Okay. Noel, what is the earlier age that you should shape broadleaves at?
Yeah, it depends very much on the species again. So there's two aspects there. As I mentioned there, certainly by the time the maintenance grant is due, which is year 4, possibly year 5, if you have crops such as maybe oak, beech, sycamore, cherry, even maybe birch to a certain extent, they should really receive an initial shaping by the time you're applying for your maintenance grant. Now, again, there's different schools of thought. Some foresters will argue that you delay your shaping of your oak, but in my opinion, I think the earlier you shape, the better, because it gives the young, vigorous tree a maximum opportunity in which to grow out of a fork or get away from maybe a heavy side branch. The other crucial aspect of shaping is the time of year that you shape. So in most cases, broadleaves, the best time to shape them is during the midsummer, June, July. But for oak, anybody who is oak at the moment, now is a really good time of year to shape. And if you don't get it done after the Christmas dinner this year, you can always look forward to the summer when that's the next best time to shape your oak.
Okay. Liam, just a site-specific question here. Would land that is accessed through an unmanned railway crossing get approval for forestry?
Well, it is important that good access is important to sites, and that will be taken on board by the Forest Service when the application goes in. You do have to show your what access is there. I've come across quite a few sites now that were planted maybe maybe 20 years ago. They're coming up to maturity and or coming up to a thinning stage, and access is causing issues. So there can be maybe 5 or 6 fields deep in a farm, and difficult to get down to, and therefore probably won't be thinned. Maybe will be left until they come to clearfell. So it is important to have good access, and each application will have to be taken on its own merits.
Okay, that's fine. A question here. I think I can nearly answer this myself from your presentations. I think, can you get a grant to plant land that was never declared? It had to be declared as eligible grassland on a 2008 SPS application. Am I right in thinking that?
Yeah, I'll take that. To be eligible to draw the basic payment plus the forestry premium, it had to be declared in someone's SPS in 2008 and paid on in that year as well by someone.
Okay, but you can still, I suppose,
you can still get the premium. It's just if you want to draw the BPS as well,
even if it was never declared on a BPS application.
Well, it had to be declared in 2008 in someone's.
Okay, even in order to get the forestation premium.
No. That's just for the basic payment.
Yeah. Okay. That's fine.
Sorry, just in relation to that, it's important that the land would be classified as agricultural land. Okay, so land, now that's a fairly broad sort of definition, but really get a forester out to look at it, and they'll tell you fairly quickly, is it eligible from a site suitability point of view, just in quality terms, or not.
And I suppose just on that, maybe what would have qualified a good few years ago might be as clear cut today. The regulation has increased quite a bit, the ecology has come in quite a bit, and so there's a lot more checks and tests being done on sites.
Okay, thank you. And just before the last question, just there's compliments coming in for both of you for your assistance over the last number of years. And just the last question, whoever wants to take it, is there any market for hardwoods at present?
Well, I suppose the industry, we were planting conifers in the 1920s, and so a lot of our plantations are on a third or fourth rotation, or some of the older ones are on their third or fourth. So we've really only started to grow broadleaves since the 1980s, and so they're only slowly starting to come to maturity. As they come to maturity, we hope we will find different locations for them, or different industries that will take them. But at the moment, the majority of our sawmills would be conifer based. But there is 3 or 4 broad or hardwood based sawmills scattered throughout the country.
Okay.
But good timber. When it come to the final crop, if you have good large trees, they will be quite saleable and they will be valuable. I suppose it's the thinnings. Most of the first thinnings will be going for, and the initial thinnings will go for firewood. But the main thing is when you are thinning your broadleaf crop, that you're taking out the poorer crops, poorer trees, and you're leaving the better trees. In time, when they're mature, there will be a market for them. but in the initial thinnings, you're taking out the smaller, crookedder material, and that will generally go for firewood or energy use only.
That's fine. And just one final question that just came in there half a minute ago. Noel, is there a limit on grant aid to the length of access road? Or do these just cover, does the grants just cover the roads within the plantation or the access up to the forest?
Well, first of all, the road grant only applies where where a forest is approaching harvesting stage or thinning stage. So it has to be within 3 years of being ready for thinning. So there isn't any grant aid to, say, upgrade or build a road for new planting. But in relation to the forest road for timber usage or for timber harvesting, the rate of grant is based on a density of 25 meters of road per hectare of plantation. So if you have a 10-hectare plantation, technically speaking, you're entitled to a road or funding of 250 meters of road. Now, that strictly isn't a linear length of 250 meters, because that includes probably a forestry entrance, and it might include a turning place for lorries. So that'll, between those, your linear length, your total length from the start of the road to the finish of the road could be down to maybe about 100 meters or so.
Okay, that's all I have for you, lads. Seán, I'll hand back to you with that.
Very good,
Donal.
Donal, and thanks for that. A lot of questions in there, so thanks very much for that, Donal. And look, just want to say thanks a million to Noel and Liam there for their presentations. I'll just mention one more thing, that our next webinar that we're going to have is a sheep webinar taking place on the 17th of January. This is the second year in a row we've ran our sheep webinar, which previously would have been an in-person seminar that we would have ran on an annual basis. So you'll get updates as regards that if you're already registered for this this webinar, and also check out updates on the local newspapers and on our social media channels. So 17th of January is our next webinar, and it's a sheep webinar. A recording of this webinar this evening will be posted on our YouTube channel, and you'll get the links on Facebook and Twitter. So our details are all shown here on my screen, and want to thank everyone who attended. And again, thanks Noel, Liam and Donal for all your great work here this evening. So want to wish you all a happy Christmas and stay safe. All the best, everybody.
Happy Christmas.
Happy
Bye now.
Christmas.
Bye.
Thanks, Seán.
Thank you.